silly.
I know. Okay. All right. So we're just going to follow up from the observation that that I did the other day,
Okay.
and I'm anxious to hear from you, kind of your feedback on how you felt like the lesson went. I know we were focusing in on pacing, so that was the area that we were thinking about. But just overall, what do you feel like went well?
As far as the pacing, I think that actually probably was not ideal. In fact, it went the other way. Usually I feel like I tend to draw things out, but this time I kind of felt like maybe the kids drew it out a little bit. I tried to kind of be a little bit more concise in the giving of the directions and of the instruction itself, but then once we got into the activity, it wasn't as, I don't know if my directions weren't clear or if they just had never really done anything like that, but I felt like it was the activity itself was more drawn out than I had intended it to be. So as far as the pacing, still not a slam dunk, but my delivery of it I thought was better than I'm used to feeling about it, but the activity itself, not so much.
Can you think of some specific things that happened that lead you to feel that way about the lesson? Was there anything that stood out?
About the drawing out of it? So I asked them, I'm not sure if do you have a copy of it, of the sheet? Or no?
No, I do not.
So what it did was it asked them to come up with their salary. And I think they really enjoyed that part. I think that was something that was like connected to them. So I asked them to do that. And then further on down, it started having them work with the numbers, kind of as a practice or an application of the lesson on turning decimals into percents and fractions into percents. So when they started doing that, I think that the worksheet itself might not have been super clear. It took a lot of like teacher clarification in some of my groups. Some kids took off and ran with it, and they were finished. And then some kids were like, "Oh, I don't know what I'm doing," and then they had to go back and redo. So I think in my mind, it would have just been a much better small group activity. So give the lesson whole group, and then if I had been running small groups that day, it would have been a great thing to sit down with small groups of kids and say, okay, let's do this, and then this step, and then this step. And I think we would have caught some of the errors in procedure that way.
So do you think the small groups would have been more like once you did kind of the overview of what the kids were going to do that day, they were going to start that vacation planner, at what point would you have interjected the small group?
I would have done the whole group. I would have continued to teach them that when we are working with percent, we're working with 100 parts. I would have taught them how to, we remember that in fractions, if we have 100 parts, then the 100 it becomes the denominator, and then the number of parts that you have is the numerator. Because I think that there was enough background knowledge through our work with fractions and percentages. I'm sorry, fractions and decimals. I think there was enough background knowledge there to get through that as a whole group. But it was the application part that I thought that they could have used small group instruction and kind of more of a focused
So at the point where
guidance.
you were passing out the worksheets.
Yes, I think that after they had chosen their salary, once we started working through the budget worksheet, so the part where they say, okay, this is my total budget, and then 5% is this and 10% is this. I think that it was more procedural. I don't think they even had that much trouble. I mean, some of them did, but not all of them had so much trouble going through and actually like using the calculator to figure it out. They knew what it was clear to me the whole time. They knew what they were doing with percentages as a whole.
Yeah, I would agree.
Obviously, you had some of your stragglers that couldn't, but I also think that problem would have been solved through small group. So at that point where we had talked about what is a percentage, what does that mean to me, and how do I find that, I would have broken into small group if I could do it again. And I probably will.
And that was actually one of the questions I was going to ask you, and we talked about kind of what things you felt like went well and then what things would you do differently. So let's take a look at, because what I did, being the observer, is I just kind of took notes and broke down the lesson as best I could based on kind of what I saw in the classroom. So, and I made a copy for you, and you're going to laugh when you see this because there's some shorthand in there, but I'll explain what the shorthand is.
It's so funny to go back and see like somebody else's, like, because you're just going,
Yeah, you're
it's
in
so
the
funny.
flow and in the groove, and it's hard to, kind of see. But so obviously T is teacher. When you see OT, this is on task. OFT is going to be off task. And I tried to note number of students.
Is that what S is?
Yeah,
What
one
would
student,
CO?
and then call out, and they were calling out.
Oh yes, that's this whole crew is just very like.
And then I did time segments. So like when you started each thing, I tried to note the time so that we
Okay.
could look at how much time each thing took. And then you'll also see like TL for teacher led, and then SA for student. I forgot what A was, but like students being active. I think is
okay.
what A was.
All right.
So when were you talking?
Verbal.
When were the students active? So that you could kind of see those elements in the lesson, because I feel like a lot of these things kind of play into pacing. You know, you're looking at your students, you're trying to gauge, are they,
Yeah.
with it? Are they falling behind?
Right.
Do you need to go faster, slower, all of that?
And I think what was so hard about that was just that, like, you had some groups that were so quick with it, and then they're just like, waiting around, and that's so hard. That's so hard, which is why I thought small group would have been just way better, because we could have popped right through.
So take just a second, kind of glance over this, and like I said, it's the whole, I tried to write it out, the whole lesson, and I'm going to do the same thing and see if there's anything that kind of jumps out at you. Think about that time point where you talked about where you might have wanted to switch to a small group.
I like down here that I'm seeing a lot of student activity, right here in this converting.
Yeah, I felt like there was a lot of opportunity for the students to be engaged.
But it comes down to being still short segment,
But then it was also, what I saw was being broken up from, learning styles. You did the little mini video lesson, so that's, very visual, very auditory, and then you brought them back in, you were asking questions, kind of doing a whole group exercise, walking them through. So that's kind of that, I do, we do, you do type process. So I felt like you had all of those components.
What did you feel as far as, like, do you feel like we were ever stalled out?
I think when you start to look at some of the on-task, off-task, towards this little area down
That's
here.
where you start to see more off.
Yeah, you see more off, and that was towards the end where and I think you talked about how you felt like some kids really got done quick and some were not. And I think that's kind of where you see this, is that kind of time point. This was right after they had determined their salary, they had determined what their budget was, and they had to take that information and start to complete that worksheet. And you'll see at 1026 it says complete worksheet. And I think that's about where you said that you might have switched over to a small group. And that could maybe...
So what part of the worksheet are we in? Oh, that's where, so you switched to that and said, okay, now they're actually, they're working on finishing.
Yeah. That was the segmented budget. So they took their whole budget and they had to segment out what they were going to spend on food, on transportation, and all of that.
Oh, I remember we had to switch gears on the realistic budgets.
Yeah.
Because they had like $22,000 budgets, and I was like, this is not working.
Yeah, there's no way.
And then directions to transferring data. Okay, yeah. Yeah, I do think that. So what I'm wondering is some of these off-task behaviors were those like kids that were. Do you think that they were off task because they were waiting, or do you think they were off task because they didn't know what they were doing? Because I feel like that's two different things. You know?
And I didn't note that, but I think that would have been either or, both those groups.
Could have been both.
Yeah.
Because I do remember there were a couple. I remember looking at was it? I think it might have been Limner and Alejandro. They were up there at one point. I just look and they're like holding a calculator, like, and they had no idea what they were doing.
Yeah.
No clue. They probably didn't know anything about percents. They didn't know, like, at that point they knew nothing.
Yeah.
So small group hand holding would have been helpful there.
Yeah.
So I think I could go back and see. Okay, yeah, maybe it does go both ways.
I think so.
But then you have like your herbs of the world that were
I was just saying,
finished.
Because I was trying to circulate too, and I know there were a couple that I had passed that they had it all done, and like you said, they were just kind of waiting. And then there were a few, like you said, that I walked through that were kind of struggling.
Yeah.
And
I think another thing that could fix that, it would be like, I mean, if it, like, we did it step by step, because I felt like that's what was going to have to happen. But then, like, we could have sent Irv on. We could have sent Camille on. We could have said, you got this, go.
Yeah.
But then, at the same time, I'm like, okay, then what are they going to do after that? You know, but I guess, like, there's a million things.
Yeah, and those are things that we can kind of think about and explore on down the road.
And I think that's one of the things that was really hard for me is just a whole class this year. I had no middle in the class that I had. I had high highs and low lows, and a lot of my low lows were ELLs. So it's not like I had, like, usually I think you think of teaching, mostly towards like that, at least to the average, right? And then throughout the process, you can extend to the top, or you can go back and scaffold to the bottom. But like what I always had trouble with was, this was a year-long problem that I just don't know if it ever really got fixed. You adjust a little, but you talk with those, you have to talk it away that those lower kids and those ELL kids can understand you. But then you got kids over here that are like, come on, lady, like, let's just move. And so maybe I think that might contribute to why the pacing has always like felt off.
And it could be too, thinking about that whole grouping, at what point do I do an activity whole group, and then kind of going back to that, I do. So I'm modeling it in front of the class for the whole group. And then you do a we do. That could be your small groups. And then the you do is sending them back and finishing their budget with their partner on their own. Yeah. So maybe looking at breaking it down that way. Yeah. That would be a potential way to address it next time.
In some situations, and it wouldn't have been effective this year because of just the way that the staffing rolled and how much help there was. But there have been times, or especially in literacy block, when I have that ELL push in, you can kind of parallel teach, and I think that would have kind of been helpful in a situation like this. Yeah. Moving forward with I'm doing the MAF grant with Cindy next year, and so that could have been an option, like just moving, with the right people in the room. That's something that could also help.
Yeah, I think those are all viable options. So that's cool. Yeah. Okay. So
sorry.
No, that's really cool. So this is good for you to kind of take a look at, and then a few things that I did. Obviously, I'm not an expert on pacing or anything, but
who is? Let's face it.
In this role as being a coach, it's I'm looking for resources that might be helpful to you. So there are a couple things that I found, and just thinking about how you best learn, what things work for you. There is a video that I found on the teaching channel. Have you ever done anything on the teaching channel?
I haven't. I've heard that's pretty wonderful.
It was actually really cool. So I copied the link to the video here. I can send it to you via email. Cool. But there is an actual lesson that is specific to pacing. And they talk about, it's exactly what we're doing. There's an instructional coach that comes in, observes the classroom. They discuss pacing. He offers additional strategies, resources, that sort of thing. So I thought that might be cool to look at. Yeah. Since it's a visual video. Yeah. And then the other thing that I came across, I thought this was really interesting. This was a kind of a PD, professional development, that was done on improving pacing and the rhythm of the classroom. And it's got the entire slide deck on here, but what I thought was really cool, there were a couple things.
So each of these is a slide, and then kind of like the almost visual presentation kind of.
And I'll let you look at that one. And this is there were a couple of slides that I thought were really good, just kind of things to think about. And this one that I started here, it's there's an old saying popular among hardworking farmers that a change is as good as a rest. So we're talking about, maybe changing up the grouping there, and that's a good way to kind of break up the lesson, so you're not doing the same thing.
Doesn't feel so
long. And I
long.
think you already did that with the video a little bit in there. It wasn't just you in front of the classroom. You're kind of changing up what's happening. And that helps with the pacing and keeping them engaged.
And I think that it was really challenging for me this time, too, because by this point we had ended our RTI groups. And so their schedule was messed up and their structure was changed. And so typically the structure would have been there that would have had that change up anyway. And so long, and like this specific group especially, long and drawn out is not the way to go. So I was like, okay, what can we do to keep this moving?
Yeah, no, I think there were things that worked really, really well. So on the second page, if you flip over, there's another slide that I thought was had some good points. And I was
started focusing on this elephant, trying to figure out what was happening.
Yeah, the whole presentation's really good. But I wanted to,
what page? Number
this
11.
One, and I marked it on yours
I
too.
got it.
So right here, it's looking at instead of just giving a worksheet and giving kind of general directions, they call it brightening lines, or bookending is the terminology that they use. And they give the example down here. So normally what we might say is that, once you're finished with this task, please begin reading from the textbook on page 67, and I'll give you 9 minutes to read. I mean, that's very common verbiage that comes out of my mouth.
Right.
The example that they use to brighten or bookend is that you're kind of giving them a little bit more descriptive, more information of what they're reading, why they're reading. And so it says that the main idea addressed in question 8, which refers to the author's background and perspective. Jenny, would you sum that up for us? Okay, now that we understand the poet's family life, let's take 9 minutes to read 2 of his poems that begin on 67. We're going to connect this with that kind of thing.
Yes.
So just kind of being a little more specific with the directions as you're moving through the task. So I thought that was just an interesting kind of piece of advice that might be applicable to any lesson and to help improve pacing.
Well, and it goes back to that focus of teaching kids why they are doing what they're doing too. So I like that in that regard too.
So those are just 2 resources that I thought might be helpful. And then the last thing on that video, that something that the instructional coach on that video said that just has stuck with me is thinking about our students as within a lesson that they're on a rubber band. And so we're kind of letting them out and bringing them back.
And that's
letting
kind
them
of a cool
out and bringing them
analogy,
back. Yeah, I thought so too. And so that's kind of stuck with me. And so I think that might be helpful too as you're concentrating on this area going forward into next lessons, next steps. You know, just keep that little rubber band image in your mind about,
that's
let
kind
him
of
go,
cool.
I'm going to bring him back in. Let him go and bring him back in. So.
Awesome. Very cool.
So, you know, what we'll do is I'll let you explore these resources. I'll follow up with you in a few days.
Okay.
See, you know, what you think about the video or the slides, and then how maybe you are able to implement these in your classroom and how that's going, and we'll just check back in with each other.
Sounds good. Yeah. Awesome.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Thank you.